Hello, this is Let's Talk About Myths, baby. And I am your host, Liv, who is recording in a brand new room for the very first time and still trying to figure out how it's going to sound. Turns out you can podcast for over 8 years and still not entirely understand the recording equipment that you use. And so I don't entirely know how this is going to go, but it is a great first recording. So I am here again, recording for the first time, having moved to Toronto. My life is still very much up in the air. Those of you who also have ADHD will understand how difficult it can be to get back into any kind of self-determined workload or creative space while you are in a home, full of boxes with no determined placement for that work. Like, I don't know what it's so hard to sit down and focus on creative stuff when you don't have like the set place where you've always been doing that. It's hilarious. Anyway, I am figuring it out, and I am first here with an incredibly late Q&A episode because I had intended to be able to do this before my move so I didn't have to run so many re-airs over the past few weeks. But it just, it turns out that moving across a country the size of Canada, where to drive, during the almost winter, it took 7 days, a handful of mountain ranges, some prairies, 2 full days driving in Ontario because this province is so large, and also simultaneously doing all of that with 2 cats, one of which is a lovely, poor, anxious girl who I adopted this past summer, who's named Squid, and I would give her the world if I could, but she is utterly terrified of being picked up by humans, so, driving her across the country, that was fun. And then the other is the kitten that I have formally introduced on Instagram, so if you are not following me on Instagram, you probably need to check that out anyway, because, spoilers, a couple months ago, I made a quick trip to Greece, and I brought back a kitten from a house that I'd stayed at earlier in the summer, where I met a little pregnant cat and her boyfriend, who, well, anyway, I went back to one of the kittens. His name is Anchovy. He's flippin' adorable, but that's a little secret-ish that I've been just keeping under my hat for the past little while until it was all sorted and I'm out here. But that is all to say, hi, I'm here with a Q&A episode. Thanks so much for your patience while I did the move, listening to those re-airs. I'm so lucky I was able to have those conversations that I recorded ahead of time, but I was not able to record this Q&A in the timely manner that I hoped for, but that's great. It's here now. And so it's going to help with my ADHD inability to write creatively in the current upheaval of my home. So that'll be for next week. And I'm going to finish the Euripides. I can't believe I just never got to finish that episode. Oh my God. It just, it was a lot moving across the country. It wasn't originally supposed to happen so soon, but other things happened and they were great. And so now I'm here and it's exciting. And I'm going to play catch up for the next couple of weeks. For now, though, you all provided me with some of just always incredible questions to answer. So here we go. Musical epics, reincarnations of Sappho, and Kaos. Your questions, my answers. Well, nerds, so I have so many questions from all of you guys, and I've already kind of had another idea for some of them. So sometimes you all will send me like these really epic questions, not just about Epic the Musical, which I will address, but epic questions. And I'm trying to think of ways where I can address them in more
direct and like, I guess, more often. And so I think I'm going to look into starting a new segment where I just answer even maybe one big question or something like that. So that's all to say that if you left me something like big and epic, you might hear it later, because sometimes it's hard for me to read through like the really long messages on an episode like this where I'm trying to get through so many. So all to say, more in the future. Basically, I've spent the last 6 months just having ideas and upon ideas for how I want to grow this show and just like adapt it to kind of make it work for what I want to do now and kind of how we're going to go forward. There's so much to come and more updates later. I'm going to try to stop rambling and actually get to your questions. And so let's start with the elephant in the room. Epic, the musical. This question is from Ander, and they have a great question, but first I want to address that I have been asked this a great many times, and I apologize, this answer is probably not going to be particularly satisfying, but it is an answer. And so if you are one of the many who have asked me this question, thank you. You can consider this a group answer via the question from Ander, who said, have you heard of and or listened to any of Epic, the musical? It's a retelling of the Odyssey in musical format, and it has been really cool to listen to as the different sagas are released. I know there are many inaccuracies, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I have not listened. So it's my attention span has a lot of trouble with musicals. If I'm not like watching it live, like even, ones that have been recorded in video, I just don't have the same connection. I actually love watching musicals in person, but without that, I just tend to not have that interest. I have heard Epic, the musical, is awesome. You all seem to really love it, and I think that's so great. I'm sure it's really fun. And I'm just honestly with stuff like this all the time, because just so much comes out all the time that I can't really keep up, not least because unfortunately it makes mythology a job when I have to kind of, take in this content purely because people want me to talk about it. It just sort of, I think it just like fights that ADHD brain in me. That more and more I'm assuming is also an autism brain, that where I just go like, oh, now I can't because everyone wants me to. So no, I haven't, but I have heard of it. I hear great things, and I'm thrilled that there is just like another piece of pop culture that is bringing mythology to like anyone, but also particularly younger people, and just like this, I mean, the whole realm of the internet and how people can basically like become their own versions of these ancient Greek bards in the modern world. It's incredibly fun. Again, not a particularly satisfying answer, but it is my answer. And then we'll move on to Bree's question. Bree says, could the interpretation of the spheres on the statue of Artemis of Ephesus as bull balls be tied to the fact that she had trans priests called megabyzoi, like sacrificing one's masculinity as a devotion to her, with bulls being a stand-in, like how even the cult of Cybele in Rome had bulls/rams as substitute sacrifices? I wish I could answer this question with any kind of, I honestly don't really have a great grounding in the Artemis of Ephesus specifically, or the, historical or archaeological theories on that stuff. I'm, so deep into the written sources that I tend to not have the greatest grasp on the physical sources, like the Artemis of Ephesus. I do, so to the listeners who don't know this one offhand, you might want to Google it. It's an incredible statue. There are lots of variations of it, so there's all these different versions that look quite similar, but the basic concept of the Artemis of Ephesus is that it's a version of Artemis who, she's, got very Eastern qualities. She's coming from modern Turkey, and so she's quite not unique, but just different from the more standard Hellenic versions from Greece itself. Of course, Ephesus was for a long time a Greek colony, but just generally she's very different and has those Eastern influences. But what makes her particularly special, and what this listener Bree is referring to, is that the statue is covered in these like round spherical that means the same thing. Little like protrusions off her body. And they're variously described as all just, hundreds of breasts, or like Bree says, the bull's balls, or I had a past guest on the show describe them as beehives, which I also found to be really interesting. I don't know. I don't know about them being connected to the trans priests. I mean, I imagine that connection could be made. I know that the thing about the priests associated with Artemis, who were, voluntarily castrated, and we now refer to as trans, obviously there's a lot going on there. I won't try to say whether or not, they were what we would define as trans today, but it's a good term to describe them, because the purpose was not, some kind of punishment. The purpose was, to sort of rid themselves of the masculinity, and therefore be able to honor Artemis in that way as this goddess who doesn't really fuck with men. And so, I don't know about the theories there. Personally, I love, I love to wonder, I suppose, but I'm just so deep into the stories themselves. I wish I knew. I'm always looking out for more guests who can talk about stuff like that. But that is all to say, a very long way of saying, I really don't know, but it's a really interesting idea. And so thank you for raising it. All right. This is another question that's come up a lot, and again, which I don't have a great answer to yet. This one is from Marcelina, who said, I just binged Netflix's Kaos, and I wanted to know what Liv's thoughts were on the show. I feel like it was an interesting and refreshing take on the myths. Admission time. I've only seen the first episode of Kaos. I do want to watch more. I did enjoy it. Over the past few months, I've had trouble watching anything new just because of all of the things that have been going on. Like, new stuff stresses me out. It's weird. And it's a lot. But I do really want to watch it, so I hope to watch it soon. Again, like Epic, honestly, it's one of these things where it's really hard to watch it for fun because of how often I have been asked about it. And that's not like a dig. I know you all want to know. And I love that you ask me about it, because it means that you think of me when you watch this stuff. It just then for me becomes a job to watch a TV show. And then my brain just like fights against it in this very bizarre way that I'm working on. But I did enjoy the first episode. I do want to keep watching more. Honestly, I never thought that show would actually come to light. Like, over on what used to be Twitter and Fun, it would like pop up like once a year for like 4 or 5 years. Like, I've known about that show, that it was like in development in some way in Netflix for like honestly so many years, and then it just kept like not ever happening. So it was really, I was surprised to see that it actually existed. And I definitely do want to watch it. I'm also a little bitter because I did pitch myself to be, associated with its promotion on Netflix, and maybe we could have helped it get renewed. Instead, it just kind of just popped out there for one season, and then they didn't promote it at all. Anyway, streaming is wild. But I hope to watch it, and I will definitely talk about it. I'm thinking maybe I'll talk to Michaela about it, or another guest. I just need to have it be a discussion, because otherwise I just kind of ramble at you guys about shows and stuff, and anyway, I'm going to find a discussion to have about it. So thank you for asking. This next question is from Connor, and I am so interested in it. So Connor said, though almost certainly apocryphal, I wanted to know if you've heard of Juanita Clivet, the, quote, little Sappho of Greenwich Village in the 1920s. She was a 6-year-old girl who was apparently the reincarnation of Sappho and also wrote poems. I specifically wanted to get your thoughts on the apparent conversation in which Juanita states that she is waiting for her Phaon to be reincarnated, and never mentions loving women in her poems, despite queer women flocking to the Isle of Lesbos since the late 1800s. Is Sappho's absence of queer writing a product of 1920s society, or do you think her queer erasure continues today? Okay, this little Sappho of Greenwich Village seems absolutely fascinating. I'd love to do some more digging in the future. For now, no, I hadn't heard of her. I mean, yeah, I don't want to say too much or too little about like, you know, a 6-year-old girl, because I think in cases like that, like, I mean, again, I don't know the details, but like, it screams to me of someone else saying that she's the reincarnation of Sappho, and also, you know, maybe this is just me, but if Sappho was going to come back, she wouldn't be going back to the States. But I will say that in terms of generally her queerness and queer erasure, I think that I don't think it happens all that often today, or it might just be that I don't see it because obviously I don't go looking for a lot of writing on her by men who would probably do that. No, but I do think it does definitely still continue. There is still a debate about whether, you know, she did love women. There are scholars who say that, like, that she wrote love poems on behalf of men, like, about women. I think that is a stretch. I think, but because there were also love poems to men, as well as women, along with Sappho, and I mean minimally, I think, but I mean, the thing about it is that, I mean, defining Sappho as, you know, officially a lesbian today is impossible. I think that it's really important to refer to her as queer and discuss like what we do know about her writing, which is that she definitely did write love poems for women. And I think that those are some of her most valuable work, and absolutely do. I don't believe that those poems were written for men to give to women. I do believe those poems were written by Sappho about a love of women, in, you know, a explicitly romantic, if not explicitly sexual way. I absolutely say that Sappho was queer, at the very least. She was absolutely queer. And of course, what interests me most is that, like, the word lesbian comes from her island of Lesbos, you know, modern Lesbos, and like that, to the fact that that is a fact, and just also that like Sapphic explicitly now like refers to women who love women, and you know, variations on that, like, it's, I think, absurd to suggest that she was straight. I think it's broadly offensive. So, you know, like I think it definitely does still happen today, but to me it's like so nonsensical, because like we've already established like all of these words based on her as a woman who loved women. Yeah, I don't know. It's so hard to talk about stuff like that as like a real person. I also think, I mean, Phaon, if I recall, just to go back to that, you know, this idea that this little girl was quote waiting for her Phaon to be reincarnated. So Phaon, if I'm not mistaken, again, is only a name found in Ovid, not actually Sappho's surviving writing. In Ovid's Heroides, there is a letter from Sappho to Phaon, essentially lamenting, I forget what happens because I don't like that. I don't like that Heroides, and I don't subscribe to it as any kind of source. Not least because it's about a real person, and that's really dark to me, but like the basics of it are like that Sappho kills herself over this man, and that's why I think it's utter bullshit, and I like to pretend it doesn't exist, much like the telegony. And so, you know, I think that it's still tied to this notion of like straightness, which is why I think, you know, I mean, there's a lot going on in this whole reincarnation idea, but Phaon being any kind of love interest, I believe, is almost explicitly, if not entirely, linked to Ovid only, which means that it's, you know, comfortable 700 or so years after Sappho's actual life, and therefore like pretty nonsensical, but also it absolutely does carry on today. Just to continue that part of the question, like a couple of years ago, actually, I was in a shop in Athens, And it's a really great museum reproduction shop with like good ones, not the garbage ones. And I bought a piece that featured Sappho, and I chatted, I guess, or maybe it wasn't I bought that. I also have a Sappho tattoo, which regularly gets commented on in Greece because they see that it's Greek writing and then they get confused because it's in Iolic Greek, and it's kind of a baffling dialect, particularly to modern Greek. And so anyway, we got to talking about Sappho, and then this I would say a Greek man, probably in his late 60s, early 70s, recited that bit of the story to me as a fact about Sappho's life, right? That she killed herself for a man. And so I think that part of the story, that general notion that does come from Ovid, absolutely made it into the like quote unquote history of Sappho in a pretty meaningful way. I don't necessarily think that that's accurate or really like particularly historically relevant as a fact about her life, but it absolutely does still exist today. So I do think, it's like everything when it comes to gay rights broadly and queerness broadly, that like there's absolutely still a very large subset of people who just like do not accept that humans are humans. And so, like that definitely still does exist, especially, aligning with modern Christianity. Greece is an Orthodox country. It's a very Christian country. And so there is still that, Greece only just legalized same-sex marriage. So particularly over there's still those ties, and that's just a cultural thing. But I do think generally in modern Western, and English speaking, I should say, not Western, English speaking, academia about her, that it's pretty broadly accepted that she, should be read as queer today. That was a really long answer to the question, but thank you so much. All right, this next one is from Sophia, who says, have you seen the recent movie Seneca? It's so great. It's so grating and great and weird, and the theater scene is so grotesque and mad. Curious to hear your thoughts. I'm just going to pause there to say, no, I have not. I did not know about this movie, and now I have to look it up. Thank you. And then continuing on. Okay, also, have you read the Dune series? They have all these references to the Curse of Atreus and supposedly this far in the future off-planet family of the Atreides are a descendant from that old cursed family, and I think it's super interesting. So that part I know of that. I haven't read Dune, and I actually haven't seen the movies. I really haven't watched a lot of stuff lately. Just everything else there's just too much going on in my brain to focus on things. Oh God. So no, I haven't even seen it. I was actually just talking about it with my friend who I've just moved in with, and we're gonna watch it. We're gonna watch Dune. I do know what the Atreides references, not least because I think like years and years ago, I was talking to a friend about it, and I think he just like mentioned Atreides or something, and I was like, well, that's from Greek myth. What are you talking about? And then I had to like figure out, I think I had to Google and was like, oh, Dune uses all this stuff. So no, I don't know enough about it. I just know that that there's like a lot of that curse nature. As far as I know, I don't know quite how like tied it is to anything in the mythology itself. But you all do know how much I love the curse on the House of Atreus. So I will hopefully have more information about that soon. Okay, and then Sophia continued on. Another very different question. In your conversation episodes, which I enjoy immensely, you have a lot of experts and scholars who are from the US or Canada or the UK. Obviously, that makes a lot of sense since the podcast is in English, and I imagine the audience is also mostly English speaking, and the contacts to experts also come from that. So this is absolutely not a reproach, but I just wonder, is it as I fear, and are really a lot of the main global experts on ancient Mediterranean cultures from Anglo countries because universities have the most money and fund the digs, etc.? Or is it just that the English-speaking tip of the iceberg is actually, and that there is a world out there of thriving Greek, Cypriot, Georgian, and Turkish, etc., historians and experts in digs, etc.? Just hoping the world of Mediterranean archaeology is not super colonial and, North American hegemony stuff. And I am speaking from the country of Schliemann, so I mean, thank you. That was a good question, and I'm really glad you asked that. But I can't like really answer it because like here's the thing. It's like it's one of those things where it's like it is still, it's even my answer is still so based in like everything that you just mentioned, right? My circles, my knowledge, my language. So I only speak English. It's a travesty, but it's true. I'm working on the Greek. And a very garbage French. But so I don't know, right? So like I don't go looking for anything that's not in English. So I know that there is, I would say, okay, so I know for a fact that there is like a very large non-English world of classical history. But I can tell you right now that it's German. So it doesn't change anything about your question. So in terms though of the Mediterranean, like I know that they're definitely like Greece specifically, you know, does a lot on their own, but they also work a lot with English speaking and Western universities and things. So I mean, your question has a few parts. I would say that from my knowledge, the academic world when it comes to particularly, you know, ancient Greece and Rome is very Western. And I say Western, not English speaking, right? So there is a very large world of German academia in this field. And also, you know, it's definitely not just North American, but that doesn't make it better. I mean, you said North American, but I think you just generally mean Western because, you know, I would say at least half of my guests are not from, you know, the States or Canada for that matter, but from the UK, right? Like, so it's a lot. There's a lot in the UK. So yes, it's still colonialist as shit, but just not specific to North America. Yeah, no, it is pretty colonial as far as I know. I also hope that there is a thriving Greek, Cypriot, Georgian, Turkish, etc. Field, but I don't know it if it's there because I have no real way of determining that, right? I purposefully do seek out as many non-Western as I can. But it is, you know, a combination of the field and my circles and my language, all of these things that are happening. And also, honestly, that like a lot of my guests come to me. And so it's also like where I'm known, unfortunately. And I would love to work on that more. I hope in the future to be able to definitely reach out to more guests from a broader realm of this world. For me, for a long time, it was about time, you know, how many I have to record and how much time I actually have to go looking for guests. But we're working on that with expanding the team and expanding Michaela's role and all of these different things. So, and honestly, this is true for any and all of like forever in this podcast. If anyone has recommendations of experts in this field, particularly experts who, you know, aren't in the, you know, quote unquote West, the field from the West or what have you, but obviously do still need to speak English because yeah. I am always welcoming recommendations for names for me to then go look into or reach out to, or, you know, if someone's listening and they are an expert in the field and are not from North America or the UK, please reach out. Like I would love it so much. It's just a matter of accessibility by me. So, you know, that's all to say. Still colonial as shit, but I hope it's that there is at least a field outside of that. And I'm sure it's getting marginally better, but particularly in the Middle East, probably not, because Western colonialism is toxic and genocidal. And hopefully moving on to something lighter. This is from Yanni. I hope I pronounced that right. Apologies if I failed. Hey Liv, love the show. I'm interested to know if AI technology is or can be used to help conjecture what fragmented plays by Euripides, for example, are most likely about. Have you heard of anyone doing this? They could feed in every piece of writing we have, all the scholarly essays, the titles and context, and I'm just going to stop you right there. Sorry, this is not about you. This is about me. I will never, fuck AI. Fuck AI. I know that it has some beneficial uses, but particularly when it comes to the arts and stuff like that, like, I don't think that I think that AI would never get it right because AI is so biased by what it is fed, and also, like, I mean, from the ancient world, it's like it's slightly different in terms of the issues about, you know, the arts and humanity, but I feel really strongly that a computer can never understand the human condition and the thing about mythology and the plays, the tragedies, is that they are too human for AI. That's how I feel about it. They are too human, and so AI would never get it right, and then we would just have this thing that we think maybe could be it. Like, I think AI has a use probably in the field in terms of reading damaged texts and making educated guesses as to what, you know, what characters might be damaged or blurry or whatever. And I know AI can probably do some good work. I think they're using some things on carbonized scrolls and papyri and things like that, things that we can't access as humans. But when it comes to the words themselves, I don't believe AI can or should be used or relied on in that way. Not least because AI, you know, on top of its the way it is generally devaluing the very nature of humanity as creators of art. You know, I think that's one of the most dangerous parts of AI. And then simultaneously, AI is one of the biggest threats to the climate of the last probably decade. Like, the amount of carbon that it takes to run AI is utterly horrifying. Like, it is the next fossil fuel company. Like, it is the next thing that's going to just continue to take out like the globe. Anyway, sorry, I feel really strongly about AI. Again, this is not about your question. I know it is incredibly well intentioned. It is about my feelings about AI, which is fuck AI. Okay. This next one is from Jasper, who says, "Hi, this is about Clytemnestra and the sacrifice of Iphigenia, and to a lesser extent, the curse on the house of Atreus." Thank you. What do you think about Clytemnestra also being a daughter of Zeus, and how that plays into her and Helen being married into a bloodline literally cursed by Zeus? Do you think Zeus cared? And along with that, if Clytemnestra does have divine parentage like her sister, how do you think Artemis felt demanding a sacrifice of her niece, essentially? Do you think it was Artemis fulfilling the curse of Atreus, or making it so Agamemnon had more stake in the war? And if the whole point of the war was to get Helen back, why sacrifice another female member of the family to do so? Is it just what's a daughter to a wife, to honor and spoils, to glory? I just want to know your thoughts on this whole dynamic because it's making me insane. Thank you. Thank you, Jasper. That's a very fun question. Okay. So the parentage of that family is heavily contested by the sources. There's a lot of back and forth about whose father is who. So Helen is almost exclusively defined as a goddess, as the daughter of Zeus, but Clytemnestra never, as far as I know, never is mentioned as that, right? So the basics of the story appear to be that, you know, the idea is that their mother Leda was said to have, you know, been assaulted by Zeus in the form of a swan, and then the very same night had sex with her husband Tyndareus, who was the king of Sparta. And so the idea is that Helen and then I believe it's Castor, but I will always get that wrong. Helen and one of the Dioscuri, the two brothers, Castor and Polydeuces, one of them and Helen, I'm saying this so poorly, one of them and Helen is divine, is the child of Zeus, and that Clytemnestra and the other brother are the children of Tyndareus. So they have two dads, right? And now, of course, there's a lot you could read into this. Like, there's a lot in there. But what there isn't really is ever this kind of familial association between the Olympians and those children, really. Like, Helen is not the children. The Dioscuri, yes, but Helen and Clytemnestra, like, there's minimal acknowledgement that Helen is a child of Zeus in the Iliad. Like, it's not, she's not treated like Aeneas, who's a child of Aphrodite, who's like saved, or of Achilles, obviously. She is just, well, I think it's because she's a she. But essentially, it's not so as much about her being divine. And so I don't think that there's really much connection between Clytemnestra and Zeus. And I do, even if there was, I don't think Zeus gave a shit. And I don't think it's because it's Clytemnestra. I don't think it's because it's this cursed family. I just think, overall, I think that this story just served a different purpose. And so, the curse, also you have to consider, unfortunately, that very annoying thing I remind you all of so often, which is just that, like, all these bits and pieces are often coming from later time periods. And so you can't necessarily, say that for certain all the things that we know about this family from after the Homeric tradition, were necessarily known during the Homeric tradition when it was being recorded. And so it's all to say, it's really hard to say, but I would say that there really isn't much argument to be made of a familial connection between Artemis and Iphigenia. But at the same time, when you're looking at those things through the plays, like, you can see that, there's lots of different kind of variations. And I don't really think that it's about Artemis having any kind of problem with Iphigenia. It's really just, I don't know, I think it's really more about to tell the story of, this father doing this terrible thing, and, the ramifications on the family, and, it's that's sort of, there's just a lot kind of going on. But it's like, the sacrifice really is, it's a tough one to place in the broader idea of the story. And kind of what, I wish I could say more, but also, I'll be honest with you guys, it has been a wild few weeks, and I have not had to, use my brain to be smart in a while, and I'm still trying to get it back because it's been a wild few weeks. Like, it's gonna be good, but anyway, I'm struggling with the brain. But thank you for that question. It's really interesting, and I think that's why I'm struggling so much, because there's just too many things to say. All right, I have a few quick questions from McKenna. We're going to go through these. I like them. First, what happens to Hermione? That's a great question. So Hermione is the daughter of Helen and Menelaus, and she is left behind in Sparta when Helen is taken to Troy. There is not a ton of mentions of Hermione. She does appear later. There are references to her marrying, I believe, both Neoptolemus, who's the son of Achilles, and Orestes. I feel like there's a version where she marries Neoptolemus and then Neoptolemus dies. Yeah, because that's in a play. I do believe it's in the Andromache, because he brings back Andromache, wife of Hector, as a slave when he goes back to Greece, and then he marries Hermione, and then there's this kind of whole dynamic there. And then I believe he is killed, and then Hermione marries Orestes. But these are only in different variations. So all of this stuff is really coming from plays. So we can't necessarily say that it was the, quote unquote canon version according to the ancient Greeks themselves. Ultimately, Hermione does play this like generally small role. She's kind of important just that as the daughter, as the fact that Helen did have this daughter before she went to Troy. And then otherwise mostly appears in these plays where we can't really say that they were attempting to tell a story that featured, their quote unquote true Hermione. What instead these plays are telling the story of is like, the effects of the war, the people who were kind of taken after the war, the people who did the taking, what that looks like. And then later Hermione is serving in this role of kind of looking at the curse of this family, and Orestes, who is, I believe it's that, he is eventually kind of redeemed for the killing of Clytemnestra, and then he's allowed to marry Hermione, things like that. So she appears in a handful of different plays, but there's so many different things happening in each of those plays, and they're each telling so many different versions of a story that it's tough to say too much about Hermione. But what I can say is really cute is that there is still a town today in that area of the Argolid that is just still called Hermione. I believe the Greek pronunciation would be different than that, but essentially there is a town to this day named for her. So she may not survive in any kind of, original organic kind of mythology, but she definitely survives just in terms of her name, living on over there, which is lovely. The next one is, again, from McKenna. What plays have the Charities, and which one marries Hephaestus? I don't know of any plays offhand that feature the Charities. They don't really appear too much in the myths themselves, outside of sort of just being these attendants of Aphrodite. And that is what they are. They're the attendants of Aphrodite. So I know they appear in, the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite when she goes off and makes a baby with Anchises and things like that. I don't know of any plays, but I can tell you that it is Charis Aglaia, I believe. One or both of those are her names. She's the one who is married to Hephaestus in the Iliad, whereas in the Odyssey, he's married to Aphrodite, I believe. So there are these variations, these kind of really contradictory ideas about even who Hephaestus is married to. Is it Aphrodite? Is it one of the Charities? And then what else kind of do they serve? But they don't really appear, as far as I know, in any kind of like a detailed way. They're very much like those so many gods and goddesses who really just serve a purpose in terms of like what they represent. They're also known as the Graces. And so they were just these attendants of Aphrodite who, were very beautiful and graceful and, all of those different things, but they don't really have character-based stories as far as I'm aware. Okay, the next one from McKenna. What were the Greeks' views on death, and did this affect the views of Hades? It's hard to say, what their idea of views on death was with any kind of broad idea. We're talking about 1,000 years, right? Or so of time period that this is spanning. But I think the most important thing that I take away from, all that I've learned about the death and the underworld is that they weren't afraid of death and the underworld like the Christian idea would, has kind of influenced our culture today. There was no hell, right? The underworld was hot and fiery, but it wasn't hot and fiery to be this like eternal punishment. It was hot and fiery because it was the underworld, and they knew that the earth was hot and fiery inside. And so it was really just to show an understanding of like generally earth science. And that's similarly linked to, their views on Hades, which is that they weren't afraid Hades as a concept because they weren't necessarily afraid of death. I mean, I don't think they were, they didn't welcome it, but I don't think there wasn't this fear that like after you died, you'd be punished, right? There's only this handful of stories of people who have shitty afterlives and they do really, really, really terrible things. And otherwise it's just kind of, you're there and, it's not good. It's not bad. There is a notion of Elysium and the things, everything to do with the Eleusinian mysteries that comes in as a way to like ensure a really good afterlife. But there really wasn't this idea of like a bad, Hades is just the world of the dead. It's neutral, I would say. And again, like the idea of the underworld is also, I would say, not just neutral, but really just tied to science and like geology, I guess. Because, again, it's like it's hot and fiery there. It's just generally representative of what is inside of the earth. But also that comes along with, Hades is, particularly under the cult name of Pluto, is the god of wealth. And he's the god of wealth because there are riches and wealth that comes from the earth, right? Precious gems and metals and all of these things. So they really aligned him with that too. So like objectively, like good things. And so it was just the nature of like what's in the earth, and then this god is in the earth because after you die, you go into the earth. That's kind of the notion. And so I think it's pretty neutral, but I find incredibly interesting. All right, this next one is from Jazz, who says, how do you feel about the Odysseus is a victim of sexual assault by Circe and Calypso? I can't really see the argument for Circe because if I remember correctly, his men had to drag him away from her. And as for Calypso, I thought he willingly slept with her and then was like, I want to leave. And she wouldn't let him. But wasn't she also trapped on the island? If she can't leave, how could she help him leave? I'm on the fence because I can see how you can interpret it like that, but I can also see how this is taking away from his agency in order for people to moralize him as this dude who just loves his wife and is a victim of fate. I'd really like to know your thoughts. Thank you. That is a fun question. So yeah, I feel similarly to you. I would say when it comes to Circe, I don't see how that argument holds really any water. Just because, yeah, like you said, I mean, like he does go to Circe to save his men. But like she doesn't even have to like coerce him. Like, he's like, give me back my men. And she's like, okay, do you want to have sex with me? And he's like, yeah. And then like, he doesn't even get her to do it until after they're done. Like, it's a whole thing, if I recall. So, and then he stays with her for a year and he's like pretty happy about it. And then after a year, he's like, oh, I guess I should keep going. Like, I definitely don't see how it stands with Circe. And Calypso, like, yeah, the thing about the whole Calypso saga is that we get like very little information about it, right? Like it's how we open, but like we know he's been there for, I think it's like 7 years or something. He's been there a long time and we know he wants to leave, but like that's kind of about all we get. I think the general idea is that, yeah, like he rolled up originally and was like pretty happy to be with her and then after wanted to leave. And so like I think certainly you could argue that like he revoked his consent. But like there really isn't any kind of, the thing about it is that like, I don't know, it's really hard to say just based on kind of what we have, but I do think that like all based on the rest of what we have about Odysseus, like I don't really think that it is a particularly valid argument, just because of everything else in his character suggests that like he would have been fine with that. I don't know. It is an interesting question, but I generally do see, yeah, I see more as you see, which is that like he just generally did some pretty awful stuff, and like people do love to say that he's just this like guy who wanted to go home to his wife, but that's not really what we get. Like he wanted to go home to Ithaca, like he did want to go home to his wife, but like he was pretty happy to just do what he wanted to do while he was away from his wife, Like I don't really think that we necessarily need to give him much sympathy for that. Yeah, he made a lot of mistakes too. Like, well, he's my main man, but he's also a messy bitch. Okay, this next. This next question comes from, and this is what they just typed into the name field, I love you. I hate Jason with a passion. Thank you. I hate Jason with a passion. Okay, they said, "Hi Liv, I love your content and how you don't shy away from highlighting the feminist and queer themes, all while exposing the patriarchal nature found in many myths." Thank you. Me too. "I would love to learn more about Atalanta and the sapphic undertones found in Artemis during her and her, quote, roommate nymphs." So, Atalanta, I would recommend you listen to the 2 episodes I've done on her. I did that a couple years ago. I just recently replayed one of them, but you can listen to the other one as well, because I kind of split her into 2. Because Atalanta is really interesting. She appears in all these different ways. But, we don't have a ton that survives on her in detail from before Pseudo-Apollodorus, who is, an incredibly late figure writing. So we know that she was there. We know that she was important. We know that she, was involved with the Caledonian boar hunt, sometimes the quest for the golden fleece. There's, she's very much around in the earliest sources, but we just don't know too much more about her in terms of any kind of character. She was there, she was notable, but unfortunately just not a lot survives. But I would recommend you listen to those episodes because I dug as deep as I could back then into those. And so they're a good starting point for learning about her in the mythological tradition. As for Artemis and the sapphic undertones, the problem is I think that you can read them as there, but the problem is that the sources that survive and just what survives doesn't really give us anything explicit, primarily because what we're looking at is the stuff recorded by the men, right? And to them, Artemis was this baffling woman who just must have been a virgin because she never had any men around. And so I think that if you want to, you can then inherently read that there may be being sapphic undertones in those decisions because, yeah, she only surrounded herself with nymphs. But you could also read asexuality into that and that these are just her friends and she just didn't like men. I don't consider myself to be particularly queer as much as I wish I was and feel like I must be part of this community in some way. But I don't like men, So I surround myself with women, but it's not in a sexy way. It's just in a, I don't really like men all that much kind of way. Not all of you, but just statistically. And so, I do think that you can read those undertones into it if you want. I think that that's an absolutely valid read. I don't necessarily, though, think that the explicit stuff that survives gives us that inherently. I think it's more about interpretation. But again, not because it wasn't there, but because it doesn't survive in the sources. Because the sources were dudes who, again, and I've said this on the show 10,000 times now, but I'm fairly convinced that the sources, as, generally as they survive, were broadly by men who did not consider it to be a literal physical possibility for women to have sexual relationships with each other. So I think that they were probably doing it all over the place, having a ball, but the dudes were just wow, those 2 ladies are hanging out. They were always just Artemis is always with her nymphs. How nice for her. There's just ladies. And gosh, she must have been a virgin because there were never any men around. So that's what survives. So that's what we can, in terms of my knowledge of the physical, the text sources, that's what we can say. But again, I think you can pretty easily read into that if you so choose. And I do. I believe that there's absolutely, at least particularly for the women in the ancient world, that they would have read sapphic undertones into Artemis's decisions and all of her nymph ladies. All right, we're going to do, I think, probably just one more. This is long. Okay, this is from Eileen, but it's spelled not like that, and I love it. How do we know that Greek mythology was the ancient Greeks' actual religion and not just a story like Lord of the Rings is, which has a lot of world making, gods, etc.? Can't all the statues, shrines, etc. be created by, quote, fans, like how we created Comic-Cons for Harry Potter and Harry Potter theme parks, etc.? I think that both of those things can be true at once. The mythology, and for one, I'm not saying that mythology broadly was their religion. I don't think that those two words shouldn't be combined. Mythology is a different thing from religion. That said, it was their religion to worship these gods. But mythology is the story of these gods, and that is not inherently the religion. That becomes difficult because the Bible is absolutely mythology and it's also the religion, but that's Christians made that way. Sorry. I'm not actually sorry. No, but it's that like we do know for a fact that they worshipped these gods, and they worshipped at these shrines, and we know that because of physical evidence of like all of these different forms of what we know of as worship, the pouring of libations and the sacrificing of animals and the burning and all of these things that left these physical remains that we know they worshipped. They did these things, and those things that, you know, all these different forms of worship and sacrifice that they did at these shrines, at these temples, all of these things, you know, that you're saying, you know, how do we know they couldn't be created by, quote, fans? We know they did all of those things at those places, and so we consider it religion. We know that Christianity, particularly, let's say Catholicism, do a bunch of different things like that. They do all these religious traditions and worship and shrines and all of that in these places of worship, and so we call that religion. Okay. But I don't actually think that there is anything inherently different about what you define as fandom with, say, Harry Potter. And I say that with a cringe, because because J.K. Rowling's a piece of human garbage, but it is a better representation of the point I'm going to try to make. So we're going to continue on with Harry Potter because okay, so yeah, we go, let's say the theme park as like a stand-in for the Acropolis, the Parthenon, right? The Parthenon is a place of worship. I mean, I think that the Harry Potter theme park could be defined as a place of worship, but the worship is of this thing, you know, a book, much like a Bible, and that the practices associated with the worship also just, I mean, to me, it's a worship of capitalism simultaneously, but it doesn't, I don't know how religious my audience is or just what lines of blasphemy I'm walking right now. And I don't really care because like, I don't inherently see how that's different. Yeah. Like it ultimately is still stories that are being that people are finding deep life meanings in, that they are performing actions that are traditionally meant to show appreciation for the characters, that they are, you know, gathering together to worship these characters from a text source that has come to them in a meaningful way that speaks to them internally, that they can find purpose and value in. And I think all of those things, all of that description that I just made can be applied to the gods and the temples in ancient Greece. They can be applied to the earliest forms of Christianity and even Christianity today, let alone other modern religions. And I think that they can be applied to Harry Potter world. They just come in different forms, but ultimately at their core serving very similar, if not the same purposes. And also J.K. Rowling is a piece of human garbage, and trans rights are human rights, and trans people deserve all of the love and affection in the world, because they are human just like everyone else. Okay. That feels like a fun way to end it, honestly, listeners. This episode, I think it's gone on enough. This is, again, me trying to get back into this realm. It's so interesting trying to navigate brain chemistry, and all the different ways in which my ADHD and suspected autism are just, I don't even know, moving and changing and thriving and driving me slowly insane, but in a good way. Anyway, I really do hope to be back to regularly scheduled programming and be writing scripts and stuff as soon as possible. I'm just trying to get settled in like this in basically entirely new life in so many different ways. And I'm very excited about all of it. But in the meantime, it's like trying to make brain think words that are smart and write them down in ways that sound not bad. That's just, it's coming slowly. We'll get there. It's a slow time of year. I will be back on Friday with more answers to your questions because you've all given me so many. I've barely scratched the surface. I do want to get to, I think maybe I'll just do like a little segment maybe once a month where I answer a question or two. I don't know. I'm going to do more. Thank you all so much for coming along with the ride and for asking these questions and just listening for all this time. I'm really excited about what is to come. So many ideas, so many plans and schemes, and Let's Talk About Myths, Baby is written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Michaela Penguish is the Hermes to my Olympians, the assistant producer who just does so many awesome things. We love Michaela. Select music in this episode was by Luke Kaos. The podcast is part of the iHeart Podcast Network. Listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for the newsletter that I didn't do in November because, again, there's too many things going on. I just can't even possibly express to you how many weeks passed while I just simply blinked. But we'll get back into it. So much is coming as soon as I can get my head around existing in this new space. I am Liv, and I love this shit so much.